He did not like Bibi Netanyahu, and he said that to me many times, and he said it to people around him many times. And so he would text me and say, man, I'm really taking a lot of heat for this, and people are really mad. The American Jewish Committee called in a statement Charlie Kirk an anti-Semite and, quote, dangerous. Charlie Kirk. 2 days before he died, he lost a $2 million donation because he had publicly pledged to bring me to the next Turning Point conference in December.
Tucker Carlson just explained the truth about Charlie Kirk, Israel, and Netanyahu. And was Charlie Kirk's attitudes shifting toward Israel and U.S. foreign policy toward Israel? What's the truth about him feeling frightened or threatened by donors toward the end of his life? Tucker Carlson gives his personal insights as he talked to Charlie Kirk during when all of this was happening. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And what is the state of a couple of big debates that are happening within the Republican coalition, particularly around foreign policy? And Charlie's views on foreign policy, which I think are fairly well known now, a lot of people lying about them, were evolving, but had really evolved. And who knows why he reached the conclusions that he did. I think his Christian faith informed them mostly. It was also the experience of talking to young people. And his views were very much like theirs. He believed that the war on terror had been a net loss for the United States, and it caused incalculable damage, not just economic and physical damage, but spiritual damage to the United States. It was bad. We got nothing out of it. We were only hurt. And he didn't want to see that again. And he felt very strongly about that. And of course, I agreed. And so before that speech that I gave in July, we had a conversation about this backstage, right before I went on. And I was fulminating and getting all red in the face like I often do to my shame. And I was mad thinking about this and thinking about the effort by the neocons in the United States to draw us in to another forever war with Iran. It's not a defense of Iran, of course. It's merely an acknowledgement that we've done this before. This happened in Iraq, which we entered into at the behest of those same foreign policy strategists, and it didn't work. And so I was going on at some length backstage with Charlie, and I said, probably not going to talk about that. I'm not going to torture you. I know your donors hate this when I say that. And also Epstein was in the news, and it was clear to me that, Epstein's probably not like a Mossad agent or something, but Epstein clearly had contact with Israeli intelligence and American intelligence and French intelligence, but the only one you're not allowed to talk about is Israeli intelligence. But it seemed true to me, and I had done some work on that. And I knew a bunch of people pretty close to that story. So I thought that. And I said that to Charlie. And I said, but I'm not going to say that because I don't want to make your donors mad. I know it's just going to be like an endless flurry of text telling you to stop or you're going to lose a bunch of funding. And he looked at me, I'll never forget it, and said, go all the way. Do it. Go all the way. I said, man, a lot of things I can talk about. I don't need to talk about that. And he said, do it.
Wow, well, that makes me respect Charlie Kirk a lot more than I did before, knowing that this would disturb many of his donors. It looks like that was the direction this was heading, even after Tucker got invited to that Turning Points USA debate. Dave Smith did too. He's not the most, upstanding guy. If you ask a neocon, the neocons will say he's a deviant enemy of humanity and a self-hating Jew and all that, right? We hear it all. But what Tucker said about Charlie is correct based on the record we have. Back when the war versus Iran was going on, it was heating up. It's still technically going on. We're in a ceasefire. I don't think we've heard the end of it, but I'll digress. He did go to Trump and personally plead Trump not to bomb Iran and not to enact a regime change war, the same kind of regime change war that Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin were trying to push him into, the same kind of regime change war that Netanyahu's wanted for my entire lifetime, essentially. And how he's talked about how Iran is inches away from a nuke for something like 30 years. He's not going to stop on that, by the way. And Charlie Kirk did plead with Trump not to do it. And around that time, you saw several texts, I think that was in mid-June, where he warned against this sort of operation, how it's always foolhardy and bitten America in the ass in the past, and you shouldn't trust these vile neocon stooges. He didn't use that language, but those people that had dominated the foreign policy establishment to steer us in that direction in Iran. So that is true.
So I did it. By the way, I think that conversation he had a mic on, and so did I. It probably exists somewhere on somebody's server, but that's, I think, a faithful rendition of what he said. And by the way, I'm not trying to blame him for my remarks. You can agree or disagree with those remarks, but I'm saying this only because I was shocked and sickened by the reaction of the ghoulish and really repulsive reaction of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, to Charlie's death. Basically made it all about him and all about his country, immediately trying to take the energy, the sadness, the grief that people felt over Charlie's murder and redirect it towards support for whatever project he's involved in.
He absolutely did that. You can watch the clip. He did that, and he blamed Islamists right away for Charlie's murder, implying that it was an Islamist that killed Charlie. You can see this clip. It is wild. This clip with Greta Van Susteren, where Greta Van Susteren asked him about that, and how he holds up the last note that Charlie Kirk had sent to him and read, a small passage from it. And Candace Owens wants Netanyahu to divulge the entire contents of that note because she believes he's misinterpreting it. But that's my interpretation too. And hey, I can't stand Netanyahu. I'm a little bit biased here, but it's a little bit different when, an ardent anti-Zionist says this and someone like Tucker says this. Tucker's been pretty critical of Israel when it comes to, the right, but he hasn't called it a genocide as far as I know, in Gaza. And, he makes it a point almost all the time to say that he still loves Israel. He's taken his children there. It's not to confuse the people of Israel with the nation of Israel and the government of Israel, but that is the truth.
And by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu is not the same as the nation of Israel at all.
See, there he goes. You knew it was coming, right?
Bibi is despised by many people in Israel. And if you know people who live there, you know that that's true.
That's true, but it's not enough. He has something like 75% public support in most polls. There are dissidents like Yair Golan and Ehud Olmert, but they're few and far between, unfortunately.
There are huge divisions within the Israeli government. I mean, there are certain parts of the intel world in Israel that do not support some things that Benjamin Netanyahu has done recently. So it's not the same as attacking Israel, attacking Bibi, but I don't think I've ever seen anything lower than his attempt to hijack Charlie's memory and use it for his own political ends, particularly because what he said was completely untrue. Charlie didn't hate Jews. He loved Jews. He had tons of friends who were Jews. He loved the state of Israel. He loved going there. He did not like Bibi Netanyahu, and he said that to me many times, and he said it to people around him many times.
Yeah, that's interesting. That does comport with the Gray Zone article that Max Blumenthal published, talking about an unnamed source that was close to Kirk and what happened toward the end of Kirk's life. I'll just show that right here. Kirk had grown to believe Netanyahu was not, the kind of figure that most neocons thought. Even this unnamed source said even Trump himself was fearful of it, of his impact, of his manipulative abilities, etc. So that does coincide and align with this source that gave Max Blumenthal information for his article. So you can believe Tucker or not about what Charlie said about Netanyahu, but it does, match what Max Blumenthal's source was.
He felt that Bibi Netanyahu was a very destructive force. He was appalled by what was happening in Gaza. He was, above all, resentful that he believed Netanyahu was using the United States to prosecute his wars for the benefit of his country, and that it was shameful and embarrassing and bad for the United States, and he resented it. Didn't hate Netanyahu. He wasn't out there with a placard saying that.
Yeah, again, this does conform to this article. The source told the Gray Zone that the late pro-Trump influencer believed Netanyahu was trying to cow him into silence as he began to publicly question Israel's overwhelming influence in Washington and demanded more space to criticize it. So if you're going to just tell Max Blumenthal his whole article is nuts and bogus and a conspiracy theory, this source does coincide with what Tucker's saying. It coincides with what Candace Owens is saying, another very good friend of Kirk. And it does coincide with what a lot of people are saying. Regardless of what you think about the circumstances in his death, he did seem to have more and more aversions toward Netanyahu toward the end of his life. Certainly so.
But he certainly expressed that to me and a lot of other people. And there's no question that Bibi's defenders on the internet will call me a liar or a kook, but that's a fact. And enough text messages exist that I think it can probably be verified in pretty short order. Not that it needs to be, because that is true.
Candace Owens has been calling for that outwardly, loudly, for everyone to divulge their text messages about this subject with Charlie so the world can see, because a lot of the neocons and Zionists are, pushing back against this, saying it's bogus, it's a conspiracy, it's the product of anti-Semitic, fervor and things like that, right? This absurd notion. And here you have it confirmed by at least 3 people very close to Charlie Kirk.
Shortly after that speech, there was a very intense attack on Charlie, and to some extent on me, not that I really noticed. But on him, I have no donors. He had $100 million worth of donors. And so, because he was involved in a different project from just yapping on the internet, which is what I do for a living, he was dependent to a great extent on his donors, of course. It's a nonprofit. And they went after him and tormented him. Not all, of course. Many were supportive, but the ones who were offended by my speech, and there was a small, very intense group who were, tormented Charlie Kirk until the day he died. 2 days before he died, he lost a $2 million donation because he had publicly pledged to bring me to the next Turning Point conference in December.
Interesting. There's never been figures given on this, as far as I'm aware, and following the story, until what Tucker said right now, that he lost a $2 million donation. That's not chump change. He had a lot of donors. This was a very prosperous organization. But again, Max's Gray Zone article points to this too. The unnamed source, in addition to Tucker close to him, supposedly he was not only alienated by the hostile nature of the interactions with his donors, but frightened by the backlash. So again, this coincides with what the other source says. It corroborates that to a large degree.
And he told me over the past couple of months he was losing a lot of donations over that pledge. They put out a flyer basically saying that I was going to be at this event giving a speech. And so he would text me and say, man, I'm really taking a lot of heat for this, and people are really mad. The American Jewish Committee called in a statement Charlie Kirk an anti-Semite and, quote, dangerous. Charlie Kirk, an anti-Semite.
I mean, I think a lot of the Zionist organizations are the lowest of low, but I can't even fathom calling Charlie Kirk the consummate defender of Israel and doubler down on pro-Israel propaganda as it pertained to Gaza as an anti-Semite for, supposedly turning against them. That's so absurd, and it's just beyond imagination. But then I look at what happens all the time, that any reasonable criticism toward Israel is turned in that direction, no matter who you are. Even if you're Charlie Kirk, even if you're Jewish, by the way. Norm Finkelstein's been called anti-Semitic, Dave Smith, Jeff Sachs, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate. The list goes on and on. A lot of these people, if you dare to criticize the Israeli regime, not Jews, the Israeli regime, if you criticize it, no matter who you are, you can be the son of Holocaust survivors like Norm Finkelstein, and they'll still call you anti-Semitic.
He was not an anti-Semite. He was the opposite, and he was not dangerous. He was a great lover of people and a purveyor of peace. He was the opposite, and he was very stung by that. Those of us who've been called names for a long time are a little bit harder to offend. Charlie was deeply offended by that and expressed some of those feelings on Megyn Kelly's show and in other places. But that did not let up. The reason I'm telling this story is because he called me and then came to see me at my house about this topic. And I said to him every single time, look, I've got my own way to communicate my views. This is actually not the most important issue to me. There are lots of things I can talk about. I don't need to come to Turning Point. I can take a year off, no problem. I hated seeing how much he was suffering, the hassle he was getting from people, and I was being attacked too. By the way, it was a huge effort. I wasn't fully aware of it, actually, because I don't go online that much, but there was a huge effort by people, some of whom I know and have helped, and like Seth Dillon at the Babylon Bee, for example. Someone who had his own problems with free speech, who was famously canceled. And I like Seth Dillon. I had him on a couple of times. I had dinner with him to show support. Seth Dillon was out there demanding that Charlie Kirk take me off the roster, pull me off stage, because I had said things that Bibi didn't like or that he didn't like or whatever.
Well, of course, Seth Dillon is one of the most ardent Zionists there are in the world. I mean, I think he's either the founder or he heads the Babylon Bee. super pro-Zionist. He's very outward and outspoken about it on Twitter. But I think the unique thing about the pressures Charlie was feeling was, and it makes him in a way a lot different than, say, Tucker Carlson and Candace, although they certainly have felt the pressures and antagonism against them for going against Israel in certain ways. But Charlie was a link. He was kind of a gateway between a rich donor class that was predominantly Zionist and a young activist base. And what do we know about the dynamics on the right between the young and the old on the issue like this? It's that older people are much more likely to support Israel. That's just the truth. And I know there's exceptions that are going to be watching this. Older people that hate the Israel first mentality view it rightfully, I think, as a plague. But older conservatives largely support Israel. And that Zionist donor class represents that to a T. But the younger activist base is much less likely to support Israel. I've seen various polls that say, like 25% of young conservatives are very pro-Israel, and among older conservatives it's something like 75 or 80%. Like, that really shows the different demographic shift, and he had to kind of play both hats. He had to play both roles and link that class. He had to, weigh the differences on those issues to create a successful organization and keep it going despite these dynamics, which were butting heads. They are butting heads in the conservative movement right now.
Shocking that someone whose whole persona is wrapped up in the idea that we all get to speak, and if you don't like it, make a more compelling case, that person and many others like him were advocating for me getting pulled off the stage because they don't like what I'm saying.
How ironic, too, Charlie Kirk, the prove me wrong guy, sitting under a sign asking people to debate him, lauding the prospect of free speech. Have a sincere problem when it comes to the free speech he's exercising and the guests he invites to his program that doesn't really sit well with the Zionist class.
This is a trend, and one that we should be really concerned about. It's not just about Israel, by the way, at all. The trend is really simple. People with power don't want to hear disagreement. They don't want to be challenged, ever. That's why we have free speech, to acknowledge that even those of us or people with less power still have a right to talk because they're human beings. You don't own them. So time after time, Charlie would call me or come to see me and let me know, wow, or show me text messages. These people are really mad that you're speaking. And I would always have the same thought, like, I feel pretty moderate, actually. I've never been an Israel hater. Obviously, I'm not an anti-Semite. I just don't want more wars, and I don't want a foreign country humiliating my country and telling us what our laws have to be. I mean, this seems like pretty basic America First stuff, and he would say, I totally agree with you.
Well, it is, and it should be basic America First stuff. Unfortunately, the right is generally captured by the Israel lobby. The liberal establishment's no different. They preach the whole America First doctrine, but don't exercise it. They campaign like they're Ron Paul and govern like they're John McCain. It's a quote my friend Clint Russell said, but that's true, very much so. And that's why you see so much chagrin among dissidents that supported Trump. You can't really, stomach this or handle this if you actually thought he was going to be a non-interventionist, and then he goes and starts a war with Iran, bombs Yemen for a month, continues to aid Ukraine, makes excuses for the genocide in Gaza over and over and over.
But they want you off the stage. And I would always say, no problem. And he would say, no, it's important. It's a matter of principle. I want you to be there. Great. By the way, I'm not accusing anyone of being involved in that murder. I'm not trying to mutter darkly or imply anything. There's a lot we don't know about who murdered Charlie and why, but I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. But I think it's important to say that out loud because it's a fact, and there are many liars out there Bibi Netanyahu, number one among them, shamefully, who are trying to distort the truth, a truth that I know and can prove.
He certainly is trying to do that. Netanyahu went into propagandistic overdrive even for him the moment that Charlie Kirk died. Just lauding him as the most pro-Zionist American ever. Trying to recapture the American right. Ben Shapiro's doing the same thing, by the way, right now. Surprise, surprise. Who saw that one? Who didn't see that one coming, right? But one thing I noticed in what he just said there at the end was when he talked about the fact that there's still a lot we don't know about the shooting and the shooter of Charlie Kirk. And that's interesting to me because this was recorded live tonight as I'm recording this. And this is after the FBI divulged all the information that they wanted to release to the public on this after charging Tyler Robinson in this shooting. And if you ask me, there are some weird oddities. I think the George Zinn thing, the decoy that was arrested right away, is the weirdest thing because he proclaimed that he was the shooter. There doesn't seem to be any evidence people have presented that link him to Tyler, but he told authorities he was trying to allow the culprit to get away. Like, that's weird. I mean, he might be mentally deranged. We looked into his history in a previous video. He had charges for trespassing. Authorities knew him well. He was considered a gadfly that went to lots of political events. But one thing he got charged in was threatening to put bombs at the end of the Salt Lake City Marathon, just days after that had happened in Boston. Remember the Boston Marathon bombing? He had threatened that in Salt Lake City a few days afterwards. So he had a record a little bit of injecting himself into these big stories that were deadly and destructive. This one was no different, but it still raises questions. But I'm glad that Tucker gave his testimony about what the truth is, because lots of people are saying, no, Charlie didn't really turn against Israel. Charlie had some skepticism, but he definitely didn't turn against Israel. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, he really turned against Israel. He was really feeling a lot of pressure at the end of his life. Much of what Tucker said here corroborates what we saw from the Gray Zone, that unnamed source that talked to Max Blumenthal. Maybe Tucker knows that unnamed source as far as I'm concerned. I really want to know what his family thinks about this and get them as much information as possible. Arm them with these texts and things like that such that they can make the decision to pursue this privately if the FBI isn't going to be truthful, which they never are, let's be honest, when it comes to Israel. You know, I mean, if we're just asking whether they will be honest about that subject, I think we're going to be in for a rude awakening. Just look at how they handled the Epstein case. No one ever talked about Epstein's associations with Ehud Barak and Ari Ben-Menashe and Adnan Khashoggi and Robert Maxwell. They won't touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole. But thanks, Tucker, for sharing your story about Charlie, the pressures he was feeling. I have no reason to think that's not legitimate. All this isn't legitimate. But at the same time, I will say some of those interviews, including the one with Shapiro, like 5 days before he died, it's teeing off softballs for Shapiro to knock out of the park with Hasbara propaganda, with pro-Zionist propaganda. And on Megyn Kelly's show, there were some eyebrow-raising moments. Charlie was very vocal about this phenomenon, the pressures he was feeling, about, you know, his loyalty to Israel being questioned at the end of his life. But then it was also filled with a lot of pro-Israel propaganda. We can't trust the pictures coming out of Gaza. This isn't a genocide, stuff like that. So taken in totality, I think it's a mixed bag, and people on both sides of this have been wrong to some extent in many cases. I'm trying to bring the truth. I'm trying to sift through it and just present that to you. And I like what Tucker said tonight. It's useful, and it fits into this puzzle that people are trying to piece together regarding the final days of Charlie Kirk's life. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know down below, is what Tucker Carlson said significant about Netanyahu, Charlie's evolving opinions toward Israel, the pressures he was feeling from his donors, and does that play into any of the dynamics related to his death? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Tucker. Thanks, Tucker, for this special, and please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support this channel, and in return for that, I'll give you access to all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Those are the members only videos. Until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.